Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're in the middle here of towards the end. Hopefully, we'll finish to chapter 46. I have on page 713.
Right.
We stopped like right in the middle of the page, but we'll start at the beginning again. So before we do, just a little introduction. Um, the famous uh, joke they say of the teacher in the Soviet Union that was telling his students that the way you can prove something exists is if you can see it, if you can touch it. So there's a table, you can see it, you can touch it. There's a table, there's a bookcase. Can anyone see God? Has anyone ever seen God? No, so God doesn't exist. So the little Jewish kid in the back raises his hand and says, has anyone ever seen the teacher's mind? No, he probably doesn't have one. So, so the question we have to ask ourselves, by way of introduction, we're in the middle of a chapter here that we're really the focus of this chapter is to recognize and understand how reflections work. Remember, beginning of the chapter, we discussed how if we contemplate and think deeply about the way Hashem is with us and how much he loves us, even though he is this great king and we're a nothing, that will cause, just like when you look into water, you look in a mirror, it reflects your face. So you will be able to create these emotions and feelings towards God as reflections of his emotions, so to speak, to you. And last week we discussed, or last lesson we discussed how this is what a mitzvah is, like kiddushin, asher kiddushanu, the betrothal, that when you do a mitzvah, you're connecting to Hashem because this is what Hashem asked us to, wants us to do. This is, and we're reflecting back to him. So now the question is, now, before we get to the question, and I think if we think about it, we can recognize the truth of this, even if we don't necessarily feel it constantly. But I think we've all experienced at some point in time, for certain mitzvahs or others, that when we do the mitzvah, we feel a connection to something higher. Let's call it Hashem, but something higher, right? Sometimes on Yom Kippur, you'll get this feeling that you just can't explain. Or you're in the middle of davening and somehow your mind goes elsewhere, or you hear the shofar in the middle of the shofar blowing, or something. We have these examples in our lives where when we're doing a mitzvah and connecting to Hashem, we feel that connection. We feel it for real. The question we have to ask ourselves is, do we always feel that energy and that connection? And I think any honest person will say no. Even on Yom Kippur, not necessarily every minute of Yom Kippur am I feeling that energy, even though the energy supposedly exists the entire day. So why am I not feeling it when I'm taking my nap, or when I'm sleeping at night, or when the sermon's getting a little boring, right? Mm-hmm. So the question is, when we don't feel it, does that mean it isn't there? Do we have to experience the divine energy in order for it to be established that that's the case? Or does the divine energy, because we're in exile, part of exile is the divine presence is concealed. We don't see it. We don't always feel it. So how do we know if it exists? Or is it determined if it exists based on how we experience it and how we feel it?
What about how do we find that switch to turn it on, to make that connection on? There's something that goes on inside of us. Like you say, all of a sudden that, oh yeah, I feel God's presence here, but where 10 minutes later you're off talking to somebody about $1 million deal or something.
So I think what your real question, the way you phrased your question, is how do we turn it on?
Yeah.
What the Alter Rebbe is going to teach us here is you don't have to turn it on because it is present even though you don't feel it. You have to turn yourself on to see it and experience it. Okay? So we have to differentiate between the existence of something and the revelation of it. By way of example, if someone would give you a 5-gallon jug of gasoline to carry, you'd probably be a little more careful in carrying it than if you were carrying a 5-gallon jug of water. Mm-hmm. And if someone gave you a 5-gallon jug full of live bullets, you'd probably be a little more careful. Uh,
Mhm.
or someone loaded your truck with 2x4s. Okay, someone loaded your truck with uranium. You'd be a little more careful, right? Okay. The donkey that's carrying the load doesn't get more anxious or less anxious because it doesn't know what's on its back. If you don't know what's in your truck, you may think, "Oh, I'm responsible for it, so I better be careful because it could be something expensive, it could be not." Whereas the donkey, as long as it doesn't know there's a danger on its back, it's not going to be nervous.
Mhm.
It's meant to carry. So the emotions of the carrier don't determine the load they're carrying. And therefore, the fact that for the first 5 hours of Yom Kippur, you didn't even think about Yom Kippur doesn't determine that whether the energy of Yom Kippur, the extra divine energy of Yom Kippur, was present or not. And therefore, when you do a mitzvah, regardless of what you feel or how you're experiencing this mitzvah, the divine, the kedusha, the betrothal, that presence, that presence of Hashem that connects to the person through the mitzvah is present, whether you feel it or aware of it or not. And therefore, you don't have to experience it or feel it in order to feel like you're accomplishing something. When you're putting on tefillin and you don't feel it today, it shouldn't bother you. It's understandable why it would, but the Alter Rebbe is trying to explain to us it shouldn't, because it doesn't change whether you're feeling it or not. Okay, so why is it important to feel it? We'll talk about that. We already discussed it, really. The truth is the feelings, the emotions, this is what carries you, this is what lifts you up. But I think the Alter Rebbe is saying here, when you express love, even if you don't necessarily feel it, but you understand it, you know it's there, that we already learned about before. Here we're doing a mitzvah, even if you don't feel it, it's being accomplished. What's supposed to be accomplished with the mitzvah is being accomplished. Yeah.
Mhm.
So Alter Rebbe here is going to tell us from a verse in Tehillim. Let's see. And we're going to start again from the top of 713. Therefore, the sages, in other words, what's therefore? Because when a person does a mitzvah, there is a piece of Hashem that's literally, when I put on tefillin in my hand, connecting to my hand. So therefore, the sages of blessed memory made it obligatory to rise and remain standing in the presence of anyone who is engaged in fulfilling a commandment, even if the latter is uncultured and illiterate. So, in other words, when an uncultured or illiterate person performs a mitzvah such as bringing bikurim, the first fruits, to the Beit HaMikdash, one must rise before him. And that's what would happen. They'd have a procession, and people would come and give them honor, etc. This is because, so why do you have to stand in front of someone who's doing a mitzvah? Because Hashem dwells and clothes himself in this man's soul at such time.
Mhm.
It is only that his soul is unconscious of this sanctity that resides within him. His soul, in other words, his nefesh, the part of the soul that's in him, isn't aware of it and doesn't feel it at the time of the performance. Why? Because of the barrier of the bodily grossness within which the soul dwells, which has of yet not been refined and which dims the eyes of the soul, preventing it from seeing divine visions. As experienced, in other words, who did experience divine visions? By the patriarchs and others of their stature who saw their world, in other words, the spiritual world to come during their life. And they were able to see spirituality as authentic and real as the physical.
Mhm.
Right? For someone, probably for a pharmacist, yeah, when you see someone who's coughing, you don't necessarily only see the cough. You already see the medication that's going to heal their cough, right? But the average person doesn't see that. And what do you mean you see medication? There's no medication there. How do you see it?
No, I
Yeah,
visualize it because I know
because you've thought about it so much and it's so real to you. So the more you think about Hashem, the more Hashem becomes the reality. When you look at the world, of course you see the world. That's what your physical eyes can comprehend. Your physical eyes can't see Hashem. But you say, I see Hashem. That isn't, the average person can't do that all the time because we're in exile. Our body shields us from that, not in a good way. It conceals it from us. And our We have to work on uncovering that and unveiling that. But the fact that our eyes are blinded from it doesn't mean it's not real. Right? Just because I don't see the medication doesn't mean I shouldn't take it.
Right.
This is where the proof comes in, or where his source for this idea comes in. This is also the meaning of what Asaph said. Asaph is one of the authors in Tehillim. A lot of the Psalms in Tehillim start Mizmor la Asaph, Maskil la Asaph. You look in Tehillim in the maybe the 70s, even maybe 60s, 70s, 80s, there are some chapters there that start, or maybe even dispersed throughout.
That's different from the God of or the angel that does the dew. Isn't that Asaph also? When we say the prayer of dew, or for rain or dew, it's maybe I might be wrong.
I don't know.
Okay.
I haven't done it here in many years because we don't have a minion usually. Should we do it in English? And I don't.
Yeah.
I don't really.
Okay. We can
Look at this there. But no, Asaph and Tehillim is one of the, you know what, like Tefillah Moshe. There's Moshe authored some things there, and there's Livnei Korach, right? There's children of Korach. So Asaph is one of the. He was from the tribe of Levi. He was in the times of David. He was the leader. He was the heads of one of the families, the Levi families in the temple, which were in charge of playing the songs and musical instruments. And he composed some of the melodies and some of the things. So this is also the meaning of what Asaph said under divine inspiration, right? Because Tehillim, it went into Tehillim, it means it was written with divine inspiration on behalf of the whole community of Israel who were later to be in exile. Now, this is a prediction about the future, prophecy about the future in exile. And I am foolish and know not. I was as a beast before you, yet I am continually with you. Yeah, this is from chapter 73 in Psalms. This means, the Alter Rebbe is going to explain. So what does this verse mean? That even though I am as a beast, when I am with you, in other words, like the animal soul, I'm a beast, and my soul being unaware of. Even when I'm a beast, I'm with you. Now, my soul being unaware of and insensitive to this union, achieved between my soul and God through performing a mitzvah, for were I to be aware and sensitive, my soul would be affected in a manner which should bring down upon it fear and awe first, followed by a great and pleasurable love that experiences delights. A love wherein the soul delights in godliness, or a lower level of love, a love like fiery flames of ardent longing for godliness, like the quality of tzaddikim, whose corporeality has been refined. In other words, if my soul wouldn't be an animal, if my soul would be sensitive and aware of this union, it would be engulfed in flames, like tzaddikim. However, since I am like an animal, that's what he says, since I'm like a beast, I don't feel it. However, even though I'm a beast, I still have that connection. When I do a mitzvah, I'm still with you. Right. For, as is known, the term das connotes a sensitivity of the soul. And this is comprised of chesed and gevura, right? Because das is where you take the intellect and somewhat become attached to it. You draw it down because intellect can be very detached. Das is a sensitivity of the soul where I'm present, I'm there, I'm sensitive in the sense that I feel what I'm understanding, I feel what's going on. Nevertheless, I am continually with you. In other words, even though I don't have the das, like the tzaddik does, I'm continually with you. For the corporeality of the body does not prevent the union of the soul with the light of the blessed Ein Sof, who fills all the worlds. Except it doesn't feel it, but it doesn't prevent it. And as it is written, even darkness cannot obscure you. Okay. So, there's a famous story of one of the maskilim. Maskilim was the Hebrew term used for probably the early Reform, not I don't know specifically the Reform Jews, but the enlightened Jews who were trying to pull away from Torah observance. Maskil literally means like intellect, but basically they were intellectualizing everything and trying to throw away anything that couldn't be understood and. So a maskil once came to the Rebbe Rashab, to the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, and wanted to give him proof to the existence of angels because no one has seen them or touched them.
Mhm.
So the Rebbe Rashab, I guess, tried engaging with him a little, and at a certain point he realized this guy isn't here for an answer. He's here to prove a point. So the Rebbe Rashab told him, give him a metaphor. You came here, Lubavitch was it still is, but back then it was also a very small town in Belarus, yeah, White Russia, and there was no train station in town. The Rebbe Rashab lived in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So there were trains already in Russia, but if you wanted to travel by train, you had to go to the stop, I think it was Rudnia, which was, a few kilometers away from Lubavitch, and then take a wagon to Lubavitch. He said, when you got off the train in Rudnia to come to Lubavitch, so you hired a wagon, a carriage. So there are three different objectives happening in this wagon, in this ride coming to Lubavitch. There's the horse pulling the wagon. The horse believes that the purpose of this trip is to get to Lubavitch so he can be given a little hay. The wagon driver wants to get to Lubavitch so he can get paid. And you want to get to Lubavitch so you could find proof to the existence of angels. Because the horse is thinking about hay, you're going to think that angels don't exist. Just because you can't see that, does that mean it doesn't exist? The horse doesn't think about money, therefore money doesn't exist. Of course it does. For the wagon driver, it exists. For you, the angels are the purpose. So just because you couldn't find a proof for angels, don't get yourself so excited that means there are no angels. And that's the idea that Rabbi is telling us, that just because you can't feel the connection with Hashem that's created when doing a mitzvah, doesn't mean it isn't there. And I could prove it to you a little bit, because sometimes you do feel it. Okay. Why is it that once in a while you do feel it? So you could say, well, maybe in those times I'm more engrossed or in tuned. Or I can equally tell you it's always there, you just don't feel it. And those times you feel it.
Mm-hmm. Like when the spark inside you is, gets ignited.
Right. But I think Al-Tab's point is here that the spark is ignited the whole time. It's not that in the moment that you feel it, that's when the ignition happens. In the moment that you feel it, that's when your glass is clear.
Okay, and all of a sudden you say, "Oh, you realize it's been there all the time."
Exactly. I give you another example. Is he bringing it here? No, I don't think so. Yaakov. Yaakov is traveling from Eretz Yisrael, from Beersheba. He's over to Haran, right, to Lavan. And he loses everything. He's left alone. He finds himself on the mountain, and he falls asleep, right? He makes in the middle of the dream, in the middle of the night, he has a dream. God is here. He wakes up. What does he say? Remember what he says, Yaakov?
He calls in the place.
Yeah, but before that. He says, is it possible that God is here and I didn't know?
Oh, okay.
In other words, Yaakov's not saying, oh, God came here in the middle of the night. Yaakov's saying, no, God was here. How come I didn't pay attention to it? How come I went to sleep here? I would have never gone to sleep here had I known that the Shekhinah, the God presence is right here. I went to sleep here. But what Yaakov's telling us is that the fact that you aren't aware of something, the fact that you when you want to understand, when you want to test. Yeah, okay. Before we get to this, is already probably a further thought. Yeah, but so that makes sense. That it would seem sometimes that the fact that I don't experience it means it's not there. I'm coming to tell you it is there. Now, when it comes to two people, it could be it's not there. If I don't feel love from my spouse or from my parents or from my children, it could be in that moment there isn't that feeling. But with Hashem, that's not the case, right? There isn't he didn't get mad at me or upset at me in that moment. I'm doing the mitzvah. So the energy is there. I don't always feel it. Just like when my wife wants to show me love, I don't always feel it. I'm not always, because I'm not paying attention. If I pay attention, then I see it. That doesn't mean that when I wasn't paying attention, it wasn't there. Yeah. I just wasn't paying attention to it. Yeah. Now, because we're human, sometimes it's actually not there or not present. Because we're human, so we can actually go in and out. But just because you can't use it as proof that it isn't there because I didn't feel it.
Right. Or sometimes, like you say, your mind is occupied elsewhere, and other things are going around you, and then when you take your mind off of what you're occupied is, then you say, "Oh, I didn't see you standing there."
Exactly, but
I've been here all the time.
Exactly. Perfect example. Perfect example. Perfect example. Okay. So now when we want to test the connection, in other words, the relationship between two things, a lot of times we use a positive test. Sometimes a positive test doesn't work. We have to use a negative test. For example, you have a father and a son. Sometimes you look at a father and a son, and you could tell this is a father and son. The way they talk to each other, the things they do for each other, the way they relate to each other, you can see this is a father-son relationship. Sometimes, unfortunately, that's missing. Whether it's a two-way street or a one-way street, or they're each going the opposite direction, there is no, you look at these people, you could watch them for years, you'll never see them talk, look at each other, communicate, you only see them be nasty to each other. There's no positive proof that this is a father and son. However, when tragedy strikes, when something negative happens, when the relationship is threatened, then you see that there's a relationship there, right? So sometimes in order to prove the existence of something, you can't do it by positively proving it. You have to prove it by trying to break it, and then you see the force that exists and that's there. So we can't prove the existence of the kedusha of the mitzvah that's present when you do a mitzvah, because we can't see that kedusha, right? We have physical eyes. But we can prove it by through a negative. And that's what Alter Rebbe is going to do here. By way of example, if I punish someone, let's use an example of a child. Or who else would I punish? I punish a child. What should the punishment express?
Somehow to resolve the conflict that he's, so he will understand not to do it again.
So in other words, the punishment should relate in some way to the offense or to whatever was done. Okay. Which means that the greater the offense, the greater the punishment. Which in turn means that by looking at a punishment, I should be able to get an idea, especially if I have a few punishments, I should be able to get an idea of what's worse, which action is worse than the other, or what, because if the punishment should reflect the gravity of the sin, then I should be able to tell sort of what's going on, right? Now imagine the following two scenarios. You have a tzaddik. This guy davens, learns 24/7 since the day he was born. Since the day he learned how to read. Never said a not nice word. A perfect person. 70 years old, wakes up one day in Pesach. He decides, you know what? I can't do this anymore. I need my pizza. Takes out a piece of chametz. He knows it's forbidden. He knows it's Pesach. He knows it's wrong. He eats the pizza. Now, another scenario. You have a Jew. He doesn't know much. Not educated. Not just in Judaism. He's not an educated person. He's a hard worker. He's an honest person, but he's just not educated. He does whatever he could, but he doesn't know much. But he knows that on Pesach you don't eat chametz. And he knows it's one of the greatest sins in the Torah. And he also wakes up one day, 70 years old, and decides, you know what? I want pizza on Pesach. And he eats a slice of pizza. Knowing that it's forbidden, etc. They both did the same act, but these are two totally different people, right? Now you're the judge. These two people come before you to be judged. Which sin is worse? The tzaddik of 70 years that ate the piece of pizza, or the simple person of 70 years that ate the piece of pizza?
Tzaddik.
Think that's tzaddik, right? Makes sense. We know, like, for example, Moshe was punished for what? Hitting the rock instead of talking to the rock. Look in the Torah. Which one's worse? Well, look at the punishment. What's the punishment?
He was prevented from going to Eretz Yisrael.
No, I'm saying the two people, the tzaddik and the simple person. The punishment for eating chametz on Pesach on purpose.
Communication.
Kares, yeah.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if the tzaddik, the simple person is the same punishment. Why? How can you punish Ruvain, the tzaddik, and the simple person the same?
Well, I mean, there was the law. They both broke the same law, whether they were tzaddik, at the top of the ladder, or this other person who's at the bottom of the ladder. The same law applies across.
Right, but we know that if two people commit the same crime in an American court, for example, but one is a accomplished person that would be expected to know better, and the other one is think of a circumstance that would be mitigating. He's not wouldn't be as expected to act in the same way. We're lenient usually in that scenario.
Right.
Here, it's the same punishment.
Yeah.
And the reason is because the punishment isn't only for the person. The punishment is to rectify what happened. What happened is through a mitzvah, you create this connection with Hashem. By eating chametz, you've severed that connection. You have to rectify that. It doesn't matter who you are, you perform the same act. The same fallout happens. Now, it is true also that many times there's a difference in punishment, whether it was done on purpose or by mistake. Or, for example, like Moshe, there are times where we are punished and judged based on our level, and that's to fix and rectify us. But when it comes to the actual mitzvah, the mitzvah is not just about how I feel about it. The mitzvah is about creating a union and a bond and a connection between my physical land, my physical body, and God, right? To make this world a dwelling, to make my body one with Hashem. And by doing by not doing the mitzvah or violating the mitzvah, I have created an obstacle here, a conflict. I have to rectify that. That's where the punishment comes in, to rectify what I've messed up, to fix what I've messed up. It's the same mess. The tzaddik is more aware of the mess. The tzaddik should be expected to do more, so maybe he'll have other types of tshuvas that he'll have to do to reach the same level. But the mess has to be cleaned. And the Torah tells us, how do you clean the mess? Kares.
But isn't there the way when in Beis Hamikdash times they brought different sacrifices, the korban, right, to appease for, okay, like you said, if you did something intentional, you brought this kind of thing.
No.
If it was a todah or shlema.
Yeah, a sin offering is only brought for unintentional sin.
Oh, so you're saying
intentional sin would have lashes, or depending on the lashes, death, monetary, or no punishment. You just have to do tshuva and hope for the best. The sacrifices are for unintentional.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay. Thanks for the clarification.
So let's see here. Yeah. So in other words, from the negative, from the punishment, we could see. And therefore, just because I don't feel Hashem when I don't eat chametz on Pesach doesn't mean he's not there. The proof is in the punishment. When I eat chametz on Pesach and I'm punished the same way a big tzaddik is punished, that means I created the same mess he did. And that means that mess, what's happening through doing the mitzvah is happening regardless of if I'm a tzaddik or not. Even if I don't feel, the tzaddik is aware of what he's accomplishing. I'm not, that doesn't matter. It's still happening. Otherwise, I wouldn't be punished. For sure not in this way.
Yeah.
Okay. So the bottom of 716. Accordingly, since as above, every Jew performs a mitzvah is granted the unity and sanctity of supreme holiness, even when he does not perceive it as does the tzaddik. One will be able to understand the severity of the punishment for transgressing the prohibition of work on Shabbos, or that of leavened bread on Pesach, which equally applies to all. For even in the soul of an uncultured and completely illiterate person shines the light of the sanctity of Shabbos or festival. Hence, he faces capital punishment by kares for eating leavened bread on Pesach and stoning for doing a prohibited form of labor on Shabbos, for the profanation of this sanctity, which illuminates his soul. His soul is illuminated whether he sees it or not, the same way that Tzaddik's soul is illuminated by this mitzvah. And therefore, by violating it, he's creating the same mess that Tzaddik is. Similarly, the transgression involving the slightest amount of leaven on Pesach, which is rabbinic. In other words, biblically, you have to eat olive size of chametz in order to bring. So if you eat a crumb of bread by mistake on Pesach, you don't bring a sacrifice. If you eat kazayis, you have to bring a sacrifice. Okay, but rabbinically, there's a prohibition of eating even a drop, which is why when it comes to kosher, for example, if a little bit of milk mixes into a big pot of meat, if it's more than 60 the amount, it's usually okay. Chametz, even if a crumb of chametz falls into a pot, the whole thing is but that's rabbinic. That's rabbinic. Similarly, the transgression involving the slightest amount of leaven on Pesach, or the moving of muktzah on Shabbos. That's anything that's prohibited to use on Shabbos. You're not even allowed to move it on Shabbos. Blemishes the sanctity which rests on the uncultured person's soul, just as it would the sanctity of the soul of a tzaddik. For we all have one Torah. The laws of the Torah apply equally to all Jews.
So the punishment fits the crime.
Yeah.
Regardless of, like we were talking before.
We're talking the intention, it has to be there.
Right.
The only way this punishment is if you're doing it on purpose.
Right, on purpose.
By mistake or by accident, or if the person doesn't know, that we're not even getting into, because then of course there are major differences. But here we're talking about someone, they both did it intentionally. Yeah. Oh, but now it seems like we're talking about two people, it's tzaddik and the non-tzaddik. The non-tzaddik is what Asaf would have called the behemoth, right? The animal, the beast, whereas the tzaddik you'd probably call a human, right? However, the Alter Rebbe said, continues on the bottom of 718. Okay, well, one second, before we do. So, the Rebbe says, let's look in the verse. The verse that Asaf said, says,
and 7:14.
Yeah, in the middle of the page, says, I am foolish and know not. I was as a beast before you. Notice in the English as a beast. That's Hebrew, singular.
Hebrew is behemoth,
which is plural beasts. So the Rebbe says, okay, this is all good and fine, but what does it mean? Why does Asaf say beasts? That there are two types of animals. So the Rebbe is going to tell us that really even someone who knows a lot and is a tzaddik is also an animal. But why?
That's unusual.
Why?
Yeah. I think maybe he was going for there was like a beast. Obviously, a beast represents the animal soul, but maybe there's a beast also in the godly soul or something like that.
So here, when the Alter Rebbe is saying, when Asaf uses the term beasts, he's not referring specifically to the animal soul. He means that even though I am as a beast when I am with you, in other words, I'm not aware of the connection. That's what he means when he says beast. I'm not aware of the connection. In other words, a beast can have intellect to a certain degree, but no das. That's what this thing. Remember on page 715, we said at the bottom that tzaddik das is the sensitivity of the soul. That's what doesn't exist by an animal. By a tzaddik has sensitivity, das, which means what he understands translates into the way he feels. Whereas the animal can understand something and still not feel it. You can know Yom Kippur is an important day. You can expect to be inspired and come to shul and not feel a thing. That's because behemoths, an animal can be aware of something and still not feel a thing. Well, we don't know exactly how much, but the idea that the animal is missing that link, that connection that connects intellect to emotions. But what does it mean that the tzaddik is like an animal? The tzaddik has das. The tzaddik understands and feels what he understands. So why is that? Why is Asaf calling the tzaddik an animal, a beast? So the Alter Rebbe tells us that everything is relative. This is relativity. Everything in the world is relative. You have a child that knows how to read. If he's 3 years old, you're going to call him a genius. You imagine a 40-year-old adult that only knows how to read? you'd call him stupid, a fool,
Yeah.
assuming he doesn't have an underlying condition that
Right.
precludes him from doing it. So what does it mean that the 3-year-old child's a genius? And the 40-year-old, how did the 40-year-old lose his genius status? If he didn't learn anything new since 3 years old. But everything's relative. The 3-year-old, relative to every other 3-year-old, or even every 4-year-old, knows how to read. That's genius. The 40-year-old only knows how to read compared to every other 40-year-old. He's an ignoramus. He's a fool. The same thing. The tzaddik compared to other humans, the behemoths, to Bainim like me and you, to Rishon like me and you, that's a person. That's a human being compared to an animal. But now we're trying to compare ourselves, not compare ourselves to God, but we're trying to explain how we're experiencing God's presence in me. You being aware of God in you, the tzaddik is also an animal when it comes to this.
Yeah.
The tzaddik also is as clueless as I am. Okay, for the person, in his mind, he thinks he understands and sees. But if you're standing on God's side of it, the tzaddik is as close to you as the person who knows nothing.
It's perspective. Yeah.
Perspective. But this helps us understand what we started with. Okay, I understand by doing a mitzvah, God's presence is there, even though I might not feel it. But shouldn't feeling it make it there more? Shouldn't feeling it make it, I don't know, shouldn't it increase something? Yeah, it increases something in your feelings, but it doesn't make God's presence more or less there. Because no matter how much you feel or how much you know, you could be Moses. You're still not getting close. You're still not any closer to God, so to speak, in the relationship that Hashem has with the Jew doing a mitzvah. The bond that's created, in the kedusha, in the betrothal, in the connection that's done through a mitzvah, Moses or the simplest person that ever existed.
But when we do feel that thing, we say our heart skips a beat, or we start, start feeling, and your blood is pulsating through you, and you get this overwhelming feeling of, the connection is more. The plug is always there, the outlet is always there. Like you say, not that we've already plugged in.
It's a Shabbos lamp. The Shabbos lamp, the lamp is always lit. You just don't see it.
Got it.
So I want to be clear here, because I see you coming from the other direction. I want to be clear. I do not. The intention here is not to diminish the excitement when feeling, and not to diminish the importance to feel. In other words, we should be trying to feel like the tzaddik more and more often, or as much as possible. What Alter Rebbe is trying to accomplish here is that in the moments that you don't feel, don't think that you're missing out on the connection. You're only missing out on how you feel the connection. You're not missing out on the connection itself. Okay, so I see that now. Not only we're not diminishing the importance of excitement, we're not diminishing the importance of trying to be excited. But it's not always possible to be excited. And no matter how hard you work, sometimes you just don't feel it. That's not going to change it. Don't be dejected and feel I'm not good enough, or I'm not capable, or I'm not getting the same divine attention from doing the mitzvah that this guy who seems so devoted and so attached is getting. No, Hashem is just as attached to you. Now, you'd be a much more refined person, a much better person if you felt it, because then you'd feel more connected to Hashem, of course, and it would encourage you to do more and more and more and more. So for sure, it's important, but it doesn't, the lack of feeling doesn't change the reality. That's the point of this lesson, that whether you see it or feel it, that doesn't create the reality of it. The reality exists regardless of how you feel. Now, when you feel it, that's the purpose. The purpose of this world is to make a dwelling place for Hashem in the lowest realm. It doesn't get lower than a person who doesn't feel. So if you can get yourself to feel, you've made a dwelling place for Hashem within you. So there's no question that this is our job in life, after you make sure to do the mitzvah, is to feel the mitzvah. But don't let the feeling stop you doing the mitzvah, because doing the mitzvah is what actually accomplishes that union, that unity, and that connection. Let's see here in the bottom of 718. And as for the use of the plural form beasts, yes, and this is the rest of the chapter is a parenthesis. parentheses. And as for the use of the plural form beast, which is inconsistent both with the singular form mentioned earlier, and I am a fool, in other words, and I am a fool, right? That's how the verse starts. And I am foolish, va'ani var. Ani is I, singular, right? And also the right after the last line, va'ani tamid imach. So we're talking about one person, va'ani. So it's not consistent with the earlier form and with the singular form mentioned later, and I am constantly. So what's the purpose? What's the purpose of the use in plural? This intimates that before him, even das elyon, which is supernal knowledge, which comprises chesed and gevura. In other words, das elyon, the biggest tzaddik in the world, is like beasts and a physical creation. In other words, the physical world of Asiya, not its spiritual counterpart, when compared with the light of the Ein Sof. So if I say, you have Albert Einstein, me and Zelda are equal to Albert Einstein. So someone might think that just like compare me to Zelda, that compare Albert Einstein to me. But that's not what we mean here. What we mean here is me and Zelda are equal to Albert Einstein. The Albert Einstein, me and we're the same.
Yeah.
Even though just compare ourselves and it's light and day, or at least in hopefully she'll be light and day for me. As it is written, you made them all with wisdom. What's he emphasizing in this verse? Thereby comprising the level of chachma, wisdom, with asiya, physical creation. In other words, from God's perspective, chachma and asiya are equally distant. It's not a reading in the meaning of the verse. It's using the verse to bring out a point that kulam, all of them, the chachma asisa are like chachma and asiya. It's equal to, they're on the same level. When it comes to God, atzilus and asiya is the same because it's not God. It's outside. It's a creation.
But I'm confused because the chachma, I keep thinking of the sphirot as chachma, which is at the top, but the lowest part is malchut.
Correct.
But then he's bringing in the different levels.
It doesn't matter. You bring in this is chachma of the highest level because each world has the 10 sefirot. So, but either way, do atzilus and asiya, do chachma and malchus, do chachma of atzilus and malchus of asiya. Compare that to God Himself, it's equal. It's the same thing. It's the same non-existence.
Okay. That was confusing. It was like using the one and then the worlds.
The highest of the high and the lowest of the low.
Okay, that's basically okay.
And this is called Behema Rabbah, a great beast, denoting that level of beast which transcends understanding, rather than that which lacks comprehension, as explained elsewhere. Because we know that there's something called beyond knowledge, beyond intellect, but also the fool is beyond intellect. But he's beneath intellect, not beyond intellect. Okay. Beyond intellect is when you're sitting in Albert Einstein's class and you just don't know what's going on. You got the first 2 minutes, and the last 58 minutes flew over your head. Yeah. That's above your intellect. Yeah. Whereas if Zelda walked into the class, it would be beneath. In other words, it's also above her intellect. Right. But she hasn't tried for her, it's like beneath her intellect. Yeah. Being foolish is beneath your intellect.
Right.
And this is. So Behema Rabbah is not the Behema of me and you, where we just don't, because we're physical, we just don't feel the divine energy in us. That's our Behema. The Tzaddik's Behema Rabbah, that's the level of beast, which he reached the highest he could, but he still can't get it. So he's a Behema, but it's a Behema Rabbah. Great beast. And this is the level of the supernal name of Ban, one of the 4 variations of the Tetragrammaton, corresponding with the number 52, with the same numerical equivalent of the Hebrew word behema, beast, which is on the level even preceding Atzilus. Okay, so this is Kabbalah. We won't get too far into it, but basically, the Tetragrammaton, you know what that is?
Yeah.
So it has 4 letters, and the numeric value of that is 26 of the 4 letters. However, in Hebrew, each letter is actually a word, which means something. So if you really want to expand the gematria, and this is where Kabbalah comes in a lot, is the 4 letters, the Yud, is really Yud Vav Dalet. Yud. That's how you.
Oh, Yud.
Yud
Okay.
is Yud Vav
I
Dalet.
see. Okay. And
So Yud isn't 10, Yud is 20, because there's the Yud, the Vav, and the Dalet that make up the letter Yud. Because the letter Yud is a word. It means something.
Right.
Aleph is Aleph Lamed Fei. Aleph means something,
Yeah.
right? So Yud is 20, Yud Vav Dalet is 20, right? 10, 6, and 4 is 20. Then Vav is either Vav Vav or Vav Aleph Vav. So it's either 12 or 13.
Okay.
Hey can have many different variations.
Yeah, well,
It could be Hey Aleph,
hey,
Hey Hey,
hey,
or Hey Yud.
hey,
No.
okay. Okay.
So now,
Okay.
Right.
And that comes up twice.
So
That'll be 15.
right. So you have Yud is always going to be 20. The Vav is going to be 12 or 13. So we have a minimum of 32 or 33. Okay. Now the question is, what are the Hays? So if the Hey is Hey Aleph, that's 6. 2 Hays is 12. Let's take the Vav.
Wait. 2 Hays is.
There's 2 Hays. No, but the Hey.
Yud, hey.
No, Hey Aleph or
Hey,
Hey.
Aleph.
So if we're going to spell Hey
Yeah.
Aleph,
Okay.
that means each Hey is 6.
6. Okay.
You have 2 Hays in Hashem's name, so that's 12.
That's 12.
So you got the Yud is 20, 2 Hays is 12, the Vav is 13.
Okay.
So what's 20 plus 12 plus 13? 45.
Okay.
That's the name of Ma.
Mem, hey.
Memhe. We just learned the name Ban, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So the first letter, the first way of our name of Hashem is Shema. That's the 45 number name of Hashem. It's the same 4 letters, but it's spelled out in 45 gematria. Then let's say the Hey is Hey Hey. So Hey Hey is 10, which means 2 Hays are 20, because
Right.
each Hey is 10. The Yud is 20, so that's 40. And then you have the Vav is 12. Vav Vav.
Right.
So that's 52. That's the name Ban.
Oh, okay.
There are 2 more, because he says there are four ways of spelling Hashem's name. Then there's Sag, which is 63, and there's Ab, which is 72. So 63 would be, again, the Yud is 20, Hey Yud, and Hey Yud 15 each. So that would be 30. So 30 plus 20 is 50. And then Vav would be Vav Aleph Vav, that's 13. So that's 63. That's the 63 letter name of Hashem. Okay. Then the 72 letter name of Hashem would be, I think Vav has Vav Yud Vav, maybe. Let's see, does that make sense? Vav is Vav Yud Vav, that would be 22.
Yeah.
The 2 Hays are 30, so that's 52. And then the Yud is 20, so that's 72. So that's how you get these 4 names of Hashem.
Oh, okay.
So in Kabbalah, a lot of times they'll say Shema, the name of Mar, the name. It's not God's name as Memhe. It's the name of Hashem. The way it's, in other words, when a person says, the Kabbalist who says the name of Hashem during his prayers, he's going to have in mind the way it's spelled out in 72, the spelling of 72. Because each Hebrew letter really is a word.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Anyhow, that's a little Jewish mysticism for the day.
Yeah.
So
they use Ban. Okay.
Yeah, which is Behema. Ban is the gematria of Behema. Ban is the gematria of Behema.
So when we say that,
No, this is the end of the chapter. This brings us to next week. Next chapter is going to be all about the Exodus. It's the shortest chapter in Tanya, about how the Exodus of Egypt is a constant thing, or how we can experience it and experience the Exodus of Egypt.
Okay.
Do that next week, I believe. One second. So next, one second. Yeah. So next week, God willing, Wednesday morning, Shua is going to be having his Chumash party, which basically means they started learning Chumash this year. They're going to be presented with a Chumash. They sing songs and make a whole presentation. So next week, we will not be meeting for Tanya.
Okay.
The following week, we will be meeting for Tanya, we could be meeting for Tanya, but the week after that is the day morning after Purim.
So we're gonna be out of town.
You're gonna be out of town and
Oh,
I'm,
we're being out of town, yeah, well, yeah.
it's
that's
the
whole
morning
week before.
after.
Yeah, whole week before, we won't be here, so,
Yeah. And I won't be available that morning either.
Okay.
So
so let me look at the calendar
But-
then again, so no Tanya next week? No, Tanya next,
no Tanya next week.
no Tanya next week. Okay.